They seated me at a table so far from the head table it felt like I was in a different zip code, tucked behind a pillar wrapped in enough white roses to hide a small sedan. I was a ghost at my own son's wedding. I smiled faintly and took a sip of the lukewarm champagne, letting the bitter taste settle on my tongue. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. This perfectly coiffed, charming young man, who had just married my son, thought he had married into a family with no teeth. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson, and I was going to be the one to teach it to him, with a smile as sweet and cold as ice. If you've also witnessed people who think they're smarter than everyone else, stay with me. This story is just getting started. And trust me, you won't want to miss the next part. Subscribe to see the sweetest comebacks. The morning of the wedding had started with a kind of fragile optimism I hadn't felt since Robert passed. I'd chosen my outfit with the deliberate care of a woman trying to disappear into the background. A simple, dusty rose dress that was tasteful enough not to be noticed, yet modest enough to telegraph harmless widow. My grandmother's opal earrings, a small touch of inherited dignity, were the only concession to vanity I allowed myself. My hair, a simple silver bun, was styled by my longtime friend and hairdresser, Martha. Just respectable enough, Martha, I'd told her, for my son's big day. I wanted to look like a mother, not a dowager. A matriarch who had spent the last 2 years quietly tending to her garden and her grief. It was the perfect costume for the role I was playing. When I arrived at the venue, a stunning arboretum bathed in sunlight. The scene was a symphony of wealth and opulence. My son, Ryan, looked handsome in his tuxedo, but my eyes were immediately drawn to his new husband, Derek Sterling. He was a vision of modern success, a man who moved with a practiced confidence that seemed to radiate from his perfectly tailored suit. He worked the room with the practiced grace of a seasoned politician, a smile for everyone, a handshake for the influential, and a nod for the rest. I watched him from a distance, a curious pang of unease settling in my stomach. I'd only met him a handful of times, always in rushed, public settings. My son had insisted he was the one, a man of integrity and ambition. I wanted to believe it for Ryan's sake, but something about Derek's eyes, a calculated coldness, always felt off. "Mom, you look acceptable," Ryan said when he finally found me, already distracted by the frantic gestures of the wedding coordinator. Acceptable. The word hung in the air between us, like a participation trophy in human form. It was a sentiment that perfectly captured my new place in this family. I was acceptable, a necessary accessory, but not a priority. Not anymore. Not since Derek had entered our lives, and had, it seemed, begun to re-engineer our world to fit his design. My gaze drifted to my son's wedding suit, a bespoke masterpiece that had to have cost a fortune, and I was reminded of a sudden, sharp reversal in Ryan's spending habits since meeting Derek. It was a detail I filed away in the back of my mind, a tiny, innocuous piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was assembling yet. The guests filtered in, a sea of designer suits and dazzling gowns, and the social hierarchy became glaringly obvious. Derek's parents, the Sterlings, swept in like visiting royalty. His mother, Patricia, was a formidable woman, dripping in enough diamonds to blind a passing aircraft. She worked the room with the surgical precision of a general on a battlefield, air-kissing the important people while somehow managing to look straight through me as if I were a piece of the furniture. My presence was simply an inconvenience she chose to ignore. I tried to catch her eye, to offer a polite nod, but her gaze skated past me as if I were a smudge on a windowpane. I approached a frazzled usher, holding my little white card with the table assignment. "Excuse me," I said gently. "I believe there's been a delightful mistake here." The usher's eyes darted nervously between my card and the seating chart. "Table 12, ma'am," he stammered, "right behind the decorative feature." A decorative feature. How diplomatically they put it. I was being hidden behind enough flowers to supply a funeral home, a botanical barrier meant to keep me from the more important guests. I navigated to my designated exile, which offered a spectacular view of absolutely nothing but white roses and baby's breath. From my horticultural prison, I could watch the festivities unfold in the large mirror across the room. There I was, Eleanor Miller, a woman in her late 60s with a fortune hidden in plain sight, tucked away like last week's newspaper. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll grant them that. Ryan, my sweet boy, floated down the aisle like something from a fairy tale. I found myself tearing up, not just from the joy of the moment, but from a deeper sense of loss, a gnawing feeling that I was watching my son drift away on a tide of someone else's making. My late husband, Robert, would have noticed it too. He was always so astute about people's intentions. He would have seen the ambition lurking beneath Derek's charming veneer. But Robert was gone, and I was on my own. During the cocktail hour, I noticed something fascinating about my new son-in-law. He had different smiles, a repertoire of curated expressions. There was the megawatt, blinding charm reserved for the obviously wealthy guests, the Thornfields, the Van Derbilts, the old money crowd who held the keys to his kind of kingdom. Then there was the practiced politeness for the useful ones, the lawyers and the bankers who could be called upon for favors. And finally, the complete indifference, a blank, cold stare for anyone who looked like they might ask for help instead of offering opportunities. This was not a man who loved my son. This was a man who saw my son as a stepping stone to a world he desperately wanted to inhabit. He was a professional, a predator sizing up his prey. Mrs. Miller. I turned to find Derek himself approaching, armed with his most dazzling smile, the one reserved for people he was about to manipulate. The kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Isn't this just magical?" he said, gesturing at the reception like he had personally arranged the sunset. "You must be absolutely bursting with pride." Oh, I'm practically vibrating with maternal joy," I replied, my voice sweeter than artificial sweetener. "Though I must say, the view from here is quite educational." He either missed the acid in my tone or chose to ignore it, like a seasoned politician. "I was hoping we could spend some quality time together soon," he continued, oblivious to my sarcasm. "Really get to know each other properly." "How refreshing," I said, letting a hint of a smile play on my lips. Most people usually manage that before marrying into the family, but I do admire your commitment to handling things in reverse chronological order. That earned me a microscopic pause in his smile, barely a flicker, but I caught it like a hawk spotting prey. The mask had slipped, if only for a fraction of a second. The game had begun. He didn't know it yet, but he had just made a powerful enemy out of a woman he had assumed was harmless. I was about to show him that nothing was what it seemed, and that his little game of deception would be the most expensive mistake of his life. My conversation with Derek was a beautifully choreographed dance of veiled insults and practiced smiles, and as he glided away to charm more promising prospects, I retreated back into my floral fortress. From that secluded corner, I watched him. He was a master of his craft, a social chameleon who could shift his persona seamlessly to match the person he was speaking to. He was dazzling, no doubt, the kind of man who could convince a banker to open his vault with nothing more than a handshake and a promise. But I wasn't a banker. I was a mother, and my instincts, honed by a lifetime of loving and protecting my family, were screaming at me. There was something fundamentally dishonest in the way he moved through the room. Something cold and calculating behind the radiant smile he reserved for the important people. He was a professional, a predator sizing up his prey. My mind drifted back to the months leading up to the wedding, a period that now felt like a hazy dream. Ryan had met Derek at a business conference, and their courtship had been a whirlwind of extravagant dates, lavish gifts, and spontaneous trips to places I couldn't pronounce. "He's a self-made man, Mom," Ryan had told me, his voice brimming with admiration. "He's got big plans, and he's going to take the world by storm. I remembered the day Ryan came home with a new sports car, a sleek, expensive vehicle that seemed utterly out of place in our quiet, suburban neighborhood. Derek helped me with the financing, he'd explained, his face glowing with a pride that made my heart ache. He said a man needs to look the part to get ahead. I'd been so happy to see my son so happy, so proud of himself, that I'd pushed aside the gnawing feeling of unease. My son had always been frugal, a man who believed in earning his way, not faking it. The new Ryan, the one who talked about stock portfolios and international business deals with a new practiced swagger, was a stranger to me. The changes in Ryan were subtle at first, almost imperceptible. He stopped calling me every Sunday morning, a tradition we had held for years. His calls became shorter, more rushed, filled with a nervous energy I couldn't place. When he did call, he would mention a new suit, a new watch, a new client. But he never talked about his feelings, about his dreams, or about the quiet, simple things we used to share. One afternoon, I had offered to pay for a new suit for him, a simple, quality piece from a local tailor. He'd recoiled as if I'd offered him a live snake. "No, Mom, really, I can't," he'd said, his voice tense. "Derek says we have to present ourselves a certain way. Your taste, well, it's a little old-fashioned." The words stung more than they should have, not for the insult to my taste, but for the stark reality that Derek's influence had already begun to erode the foundation of our relationship. My son, my kind, gentle boy, had become a pawn in a game I didn't yet understand. Deciding to test the waters, I left my secluded table during a lull in the festivities. I spotted an elderly couple, the Hendersons, sitting next to me. I knew they were old friends of Robert's and had been a major force in the investment world for years. They were currently being showered with attention by Derek, who was telling them a story about a recent business triumph. "Mrs. Miller," Derek said, catching my eye, "really looking forward to Thursday." He was so confident, so sure of his victory. "So am I, dear," I replied, a chilling smile on my face. "So am I." As Derek moved away, I leaned over to Mrs. Henderson, a woman who had seen it all in the investment world. "That Derek is a charmer, isn't he?" I said, with a conspiratorial whisper. "He's just so ambitious, a real go-getter." Mrs. Henderson gave me a knowing look that spoke volumes. "He is," she said, her voice dry as a bone. "He certainly talks a good game. We had some mutual acquaintances in the city, but they've all gone quiet about him. He had a few ventures that, well, they didn't quite pan out. A lot of investors lost a lot of money." A cold dread settled in my stomach. So he wasn't a success story. He was a fraud, a man drowning in debt and looking for a lifeline. I felt a surge of protectiveness for my son, a visceral need to shield him from this predator. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. The sudden expensive car, the constant talk of looking the part, the desperation I'd seen in his eyes when he talked to the wealthy guests. My son had married a man who was using him to gain access to our family's perceived wealth, a man who saw me, a modest, unassuming widow, as a potential mark. I couldn't help but think of my husband, Robert, a brilliant man who had spent 40 years building our fortune in complete secrecy. He had lived a life of deliberate simplicity, driving a modest sedan, wearing plain suits, and living in a house that was comfortable but not ostentatious. Everyone, including our own children, thought Robert had been a simple man who had done moderately well in the stock market. What they didn't know was that he had a fortune, a vast, protected, and completely secret fortune. I remembered a conversation we had shortly before he passed. He was sitting in his worn armchair, holding my hand, a look of profound love and concern in his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a frail whisper, "I've spent a lifetime building something for you, something that will protect you no matter what. I've always worried about people like him. He gestured vaguely toward the television, where a news report about a financial scam was playing. People who see a vulnerable person and think they see an easy target. Don't ever let them, Eleanor. Don't ever let them. At the time, I dismissed his words as the ramblings of a man nearing his end. I had no idea that he had a real reason to be so concerned. I had no idea he was talking about an inheritance of $33 million, a legacy hidden in a secret safe in our basement. As the evening wound down, and Ryan and Derek prepared to toss the bouquet and garter, I caught my reflection in the mirror again. A silver-haired woman in an understated dress, sitting alone behind a wall of flowers. Someone who looked like she probably shopped with coupons and worried about heating bills. It was exactly the image I had been cultivating for 2 years. An image of benign, harmless mediocrity. A mask I had worn so perfectly that even my own family believed it. And it was exactly the image that Derek Sterling had targeted. He thought I was a harmless widow, a simple mark. He had no idea that I was a woman with $33 million in secrets, a woman who had been trained by a master to protect what was hers, and a woman who was about to turn his life into a very long, very expensive funeral procession. He had picked the wrong family. He had picked the wrong widow, and I was about to make him regret the day he ever looked at me and saw an opportunity. The real game was just beginning, and I was holding all the cards. The post-wedding aftermath was a period of deceptive calm. Ryan called daily, his conversations a breathless symphony of marital bliss, and how wonderfully Derek was treating him. He's so thoughtful, Mom. Always thinking ahead about our future and our financial security. Security. The word floated through our conversations like smoke before a fire. How lovely, sweetheart. A husband should definitely think about money constantly, especially other people's money. What did I mean? Nothing, dear. Just that financial planning is so romantic. Ryan, caught up in the haze of newlywed joy, missed the sarcasm entirely, which was probably for the best. I would not burden him with the truth until I had all the facts. My first priority was to gather information, to understand the true depth of Derek's desperation and the extent of his deception. I knew that men like him rarely operated alone, and that his carefully constructed plan likely had a network of collaborators. My mission was to uncover that network and dismantle it piece by piece. I spent the next few days doing what I did best, observing and planning. I began by making a series of discreet phone calls to some of Robert's former colleagues and friends. They all offered their condolences and spoke of Robert with a quiet reverence, a sign of the respect he had commanded in his professional life, even as he lived his personal life in obscurity. When I brought up Derek's name, the reactions were subtle but telling. A long pause, a change in tone, a vague statement about not knowing him well. I pieced together fragments of information: a failed hedge fund, a string of unpaid debts, a reputation for aggressive and unethical business practices. One old friend, a retired lawyer who had handled some of Robert's small public-facing matters, was more direct. "Eleanor," he said, his voice grave. "I ran into Derek Sterling at a firm event a few months ago. He was quite persistent. He asked about your husband's estate, specifically about the size of it. I told him it was a modest legacy, nothing that would interest a man like him. But he pressed, asking about any hidden assets, any trusts that might not be public knowledge. He was fishing, Eleanor, and he was fishing for a very big fish." The lawyer's words were the final nail in the coffin of my doubts. Derek wasn't just ambitious. He was a scavenger, a man who preyed on the unsuspecting. My son, my sweet, trusting Ryan, had become his meal ticket. A profound, cold rage settled over me. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was a lioness whose cub was in danger, and the predator had just made the mistake of stepping into her territory. I had kept quiet for 2 years out of respect for Robert's wishes, but now, faced with this threat, the rules had changed. I had a choice to make: to remain a passive victim, or to use the $33 million my husband had so carefully hidden to wage a war against the man who wanted to steal my son's future. My choice, I knew, was a foregone conclusion. The game had begun, and I was about to show Derek Sterling just how dangerous an underestimated widow with a secret fortune could be. The weekend passed with a deceptive calm, but I could feel Derek's impatience crackling through the phone lines like static electricity. Ryan called twice, both times casually inquiring about that helpful paperwork Derek had shown me. "Still mulling it over, sweetheart," I'd tell him, my voice as sweet as honey. "He's just trying to help, Mom," Ryan insisted. "He knows so much about legal things." Legal things, like theft, was just another item on a professional development checklist. I didn't correct him. The time for truth would come, but not yet. Monday morning brought the call I had been waiting for, the one that confirmed my suspicions about my charming son-in-law's true nature. "Eleanor, it's Derek." His voice was a practiced symphony of concern and urgency. "I hope you've had time to think about our discussion." "Oh, I've been thinking about very little else," I replied, allowing a hint of feigned helplessness to creep into my tone. "Wonderful," he said, the relief in his voice a palpable thing. "I was hoping we could meet again this week. I have some additional information that might help clarify things." Additional information? More sophisticated lies, presumably. How thoughtful. "Same restaurant?" "Actually, I was thinking somewhere more private," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Maybe your home. I could bring some documents that would be easier to review in a comfortable setting." My home, where he could pressure me without witnesses. What kind of documents? Just some examples of how these arrangements have helped other families. Success stories, you might say. Success stories about elderly people who'd surrendered their independence to charming predators. "That sounds fascinating," I said, and the lie tasted like iron on my tongue. Wednesday evening, around 7. "Perfect," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Wednesday couldn't come fast enough. I spent the intervening days doing what I did best, observing and planning. If Derek wanted to play games in my house, I'd make sure the game was rigged in my favor. I had already made a call to a private investigator, a former police officer named David, a man with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness. David had been a friend of Robert's, and when I told him what I suspected, he had immediately agreed to help. "Eleanor," he had said, his voice grave, "I'll do everything I can to get you the truth. Robert was a good man, and he wouldn't want to see you hurt." With David's help, I began to piece together Derek's sordid past. We found records of a failed investment fund, a trail of disgruntled investors, and a list of outstanding debts so long it made my head spin. He wasn't a self-made man. He was a man on the run from his own failures. I also made a call to a friend of mine, a woman I had met through Robert who worked as a financial crimes analyst. She had an uncanny ability to connect the dots in complicated financial schemes. I didn't tell her everything, just that I had some concerns about my son's new husband and his business dealings. She agreed to do a quick background check and get back to me. The information she provided was both shocking and revealing. Derek had a history of targeting vulnerable people, especially those with family connections to money. He would identify a potential victim, befriend a family member, and then systematically gain access to the family's assets. He was a professional, an artist of manipulation and deceit. He was a master of his craft, and he was hunting me. I decided to set my own trap, one that would expose his true nature and provide me with the evidence I needed to destroy him. I contacted my old friend Martha, the hairdresser who had done my hair for the wedding. She was a woman who knew everything about everyone, and she was fiercely loyal. I told her I was concerned about a man who was trying to take advantage of me, and she immediately went into full-on protective mode. "Eleanor, you tell me his name, and I'll find out everything about him," she had said, her voice a low growl. Martha had connections everywhere, and she knew people who knew people. With her help, I was able to verify some of the information David had found. Derek's gambling debts were not a rumor, they were a fact. He was in deep, and he was desperate. By Wednesday evening, I was ready for battle. I chose a simple gray dress, a modest piece that would suggest respectability without prosperity, the perfect costume for a woman about to spring a very expensive trap. I felt a wave of calm wash over me. The anxiety I had felt at the wedding was gone, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. I was no longer a victim. I was a warrior. I had a mission, and I had the resources to see it through. As I touched up my lipstick in the mirror, I practiced my innocent, harmless, elderly widow expression. Derek would see what he wanted to see, a vulnerable old woman in her own home, ready to be protected. He would have no idea that the real danger was sitting across from him, waiting for him to make his first move. He arrived precisely at 7, armed with his briefcase and his most trustworthy smile. "Eleanor, thank you so much for agreeing to meet here," he said, his voice oozing with false sincerity. "I know this whole situation can feel overwhelming." "Oh, I'm not overwhelmed at all," I replied, my voice light and airy. "I'm actually finding it quite educational." He settled into my living room like he belonged there, spreading documents across my coffee table with practiced efficiency. I brought some case studies of families who've benefited from these arrangements. I think you'll find them reassuring. How thoughtful. But before we discuss other people's stories, I have some questions about your story. His confident expression flickered slightly. "My story?" he asked, a hint of unease in his voice. "Yes," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was both intimate and menacing. "I'm curious about your background, your qualifications for managing other people's lives." His mask was cracking like old paint. The game was afoot, and I was about to show him that I was a master of a different kind of game, one he was not prepared to play. Derek's confident expression flickered slightly. "My story?" he asked again, a hint of unease in his voice, the mask beginning to crack. "Well, I have extensive business experience." "In what field?" I pressed, my tone as polite and unassuming as a librarian. He shifted in his seat, a subtle, nervous movement. "Investment management, primarily." "For which firm?" I watched his eyes dart around the room, as if searching for an escape route. A familiar tell I had seen in countless men Robert had brought home for dinner over the years. "I work independently now." "And before that?" "Various positions in financial services." "Various positions." How delightfully vague. I mused, a slow, knowing smile spreading across my face. I had him. The facade of success he had so carefully constructed was starting to crumble, revealing the desperation underneath. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "How long have you been advising elderly people about their financial decisions?" My question hit him like a physical blow. He recoiled slightly, his carefully composed posture losing its stiffness. A bead of sweat formed on his brow, the perfect betrayer of his fear. "I wouldn't call it advising, more like protective planning." "And how many elderly people have you protected?" I continued, my questions coming faster now. A series of precise jabs. "A few. Families who needed guidance? Guidance they requested? Or guidance you suggested they needed?" The room fell silent except for the ticking of my grandmother's clock on the mantel. Every second felt like an hour as Derek's mind raced, trying to find an escape route. His knuckles went white as he gripped the edge of my coffee table, the expensive wood suddenly a weapon against him. "Eleanor, I think there might be some misunderstanding about my intentions," he said, trying to regain control of the conversation. His voice was no longer that of a confident executive, but of a man on the defensive. "Oh, I understand your intentions perfectly," I replied, my smile not reaching my eyes. "And what I'm curious about is your methods." Your methods for identifying vulnerable targets, for gaining their trust, for convincing them to sign away their rights. His face went pale, a mixture of shock and dawning horror. He finally seemed to comprehend that the woman sitting across from him was not the harmless widow he had sought out. The realization was physically visible, a sudden draining of color from his skin, a slackening of his jaw. I would never. Never what, Derek? Never target elderly widows? Never manipulate them with false concern? Never steal their independence under the guise of protection? My voice was like a scalpel, cutting through his carefully constructed lies. The mask was off. The charming son-in-law was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered predator. He tried to stand, to collect his papers, but I put a hand on his arm, and my grip, though seemingly frail, was like a vice. He froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You're making serious accusations," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "I'm making serious observations about a serious predator who made a serious mistake," I said, a profound sense of cold calm settling over me. He had underestimated me. He had assumed I was just another harmless widow, a simple mark to be fleeced and forgotten. He was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. "What mistake?" he said, his bravado returning for a moment, a last-ditch effort to save face. "Assuming I was just another helpless widow," I replied, my voice as cold and sharp as broken glass. "Eleanor, I think you're confused," he said, his eyes darting toward the door. "I'm not confused at all. I know exactly what you're trying to do," I said, leaning closer, my eyes fixed on his. "The question is whether you know what I'm about to do." "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice now a desperate whisper. "I'm talking about the fact that I've been recording this entire conversation," I said, and the color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. "I'm talking about the private investigator who's been documenting your activities. I'm talking about the attorney who's preparing criminal charges. The carefully constructed plan that had taken him months to put in place was crumbling before his eyes." He tried to speak, but no words came out. "You can't prove anything," he finally managed to say, the lie sounding hollow and unconvincing. "I can prove everything," I said, a wave of profound satisfaction washing over me. "Your financial troubles, your gambling debts, your pattern of targeting elderly people, all of it." He went very still, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "How do you know about that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The question was a confession. He had no more lies left, only fear. "I know everything about you, Derek," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was both intimate and menacing, "including the fact that you're not my first admirer." "What do you mean?" he asked, his eyes filled with terror. "I mean, you're not the first charming young man who's tried to separate me from my assets," I said. "The difference is, this time, I was prepared." "Prepared how?" I stood up slowly, my voice dropping to a whisper that could cut glass. "Prepared to destroy anyone who tries to steal what my husband spent 40 years building." The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated terror. The sophisticated predator was gone, replaced by a terrified boy facing a reckoning. He had no more cards to play, no more charming words to use. He was just a man, drowning in his own lies. "You don't understand," he pleaded, his bravado completely gone. "I'm desperate. You need to leave now, Derek," I said, my voice as firm as a judge's verdict, "before I call the police." He scrambled to gather his papers, his hands shaking so badly that the documents scattered across the floor. His carefully constructed plan was crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. "This isn't over," he snarled, a final desperate threat, his eyes burning with a hatred that I knew was born from his own failure. "Yes," I said, thinking of the safe in the basement and the treasures it held. "It is." After he left, I poured myself a glass of Robert's best wine and sat in my quiet kitchen. The house, which had felt so empty for 2 years, now felt like a sanctuary, a fortress I had successfully defended. Tomorrow, I'd go down to the basement and open that old safe. Tomorrow, I'd learn exactly what weapons my husband had left me. Tonight, I'd savor the look of panic in Derek Sterling's eyes when he realized he'd chosen the wrong widow to mess with. Some predators, I decided, learn too late that sometimes the prey has bigger teeth than the hunter. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was the dragon who guarded my family's treasure. And Derek Sterling had just made the mistake of trying to steal it. The game was over for him. But for me, it was just the beginning. Thursday morning, I stood at the top of my basement stairs, holding Robert's key, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. For 2 years, I'd avoided this moment, too grief-stricken to face whatever secrets my husband had left behind. But Derek Sterling had just given me an excellent reason to overcome my reluctance. The basement smelled like old paper and Robert's cologne, the scent still clinging to his clothes hanging in the corner. His desk sat exactly as he'd left it, a monument to a life of quiet diligence, crossword puzzles, coffee-stained coasters, the reading glasses he'd worn for 40 years. My fingers traced the familiar grooves of the old oak desk, and a wave of profound nostalgia washed over me. I remembered him sitting here, hunched over ledgers and investment reports, his face a mask of concentration. I had always assumed it was just his hobby, a way for him to unwind after a long day of work. I had no idea it was the foundation of an empire. The safe was hidden behind a panel I'd never noticed, camouflaged to look like part of the concrete wall. Robert had always been cleverer than he let on. The metal was cold to the touch as I inserted the key, the tumblers clicking with a quiet, satisfying finality. Inside, I found documents that made my hands shake, bank statements showing accounts I'd never heard of, investment records spanning decades, legal papers establishing trusts and protections I didn't know existed. It was a world I had never seen, a testament to a man I thought I knew completely but who had kept a monumental secret to protect me. At the very bottom, beneath layers of meticulously organized paperwork, was a letter in Robert's familiar, spidery handwriting that changed everything. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and someone is trying to take advantage of your generous heart. I'm sorry I never told you about the money. I lived modestly so we could die wealthy, and I hid our wealth so you'd be safe from predators. I knew they would come for you, one day, exactly like whoever drove you to open this safe. I knew you would be underestimated, that they would see a grieving widow, and not the fierce, brilliant woman I loved. I couldn't bear the thought of you fighting for this alone, so I left you the weapons you'd need to win. There's a business card in this envelope for Carol Peterson. She's handled everything since I got sick. She knows about the threats you might face, and she has instructions to help you fight back. Don't let anyone steal what I spent 40 years building for you. Use every penny if you have to. Make them regret the day they decided to mess with my wife. Your loving husband, Robert. $33 million. I sat down heavily on Robert's old chair, the numbers swimming in front of my eyes. 33 million, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. It was a surreal moment, a complete shattering of the reality I had known. For 2 years, I had been the modest widow, the woman with the small, comfortable house and the quiet life. All of it had been a lie, a beautifully constructed deception to keep me safe. Derek Sterling had looked at my simple life and seen an opportunity. He had no idea he was looking at a decoy, a carefully placed trap designed by a genius. I found Carol's card and called immediately. Peterson Law Office. This is Eleanor Miller, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of shock and resolve. I believe my husband Robert arranged for you to assist me. There was a pause on the other end, a brief, telling silence. Mrs. Miller, the voice replied, calm and professional. I've been waiting 2 years for your call. Can you come in today? How soon? I asked, my voice gaining a new sense of purpose. How about right now? Carol Peterson's office was nothing like the stuffy legal chambers I'd expected. It was modern, bright, and filled with personal touches, with family photos scattered among law degrees. She was younger than I'd imagined, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and a handshake that could crack walnuts. Eleanor, please sit, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Robert told me this day might come. What day? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The day someone tried to manipulate you into signing away your rights. She spread documents across her desk, trust papers, investment records, legal protections I'd never dreamed of. Your husband was remarkably prescient, she said. He predicted someone would approach you within 2 years of his death, probably through family connections, trying to gain control of what they assumed were modest assets. But they're not modest, I said, the words feeling alien on my tongue. No, they're not. $33 million, completely protected in an irrevocable trust. You control everything, but no one else can access it. Even if they somehow gained power of attorney, even if you signed Derek's papers, she explained, her voice as solid and comforting as an anchor. Even then, Robert specifically designed this to protect you from exactly that kind of manipulation. I leaned back in my chair, feeling like I was seeing my life clearly for the first time in 2 years. So Derek can't touch any of it. Derek can't touch a penny, Carol confirmed. But more importantly, you now have the resources to make sure he never tries this again. A cold, satisfying wave of power washed over me. What do you mean? I asked, a predatory gleam entering my eyes. Carol smiled with something that looked almost predatory herself. I mean, we're going to destroy him so thoroughly that he'll spend the rest of his life warning other predators about the dangers of underestimating widows. How? I asked, the word a simple, brutal demand. Criminal charges for attempted fraud, Carol said. The words, a delicious promise. Civil suits for damages. And we're going to investigate every financial transaction he's made for the past 5 years. Is that legal? Perfectly legal. When someone attempts to defraud you, we'll find out where his money came from, where it went, and who else he owes. We'll expose his entire operation. Operation? Oh, yes. Men like Derek don't work alone. There's a whole network of people who target elderly victims. We're going to find them all. I thought about my son, about his blind faith in his new husband. What happens to my son's marriage? That's up to Ryan. But he'll make that decision with complete information instead of lies and manipulation. I gathered up the trust documents, feeling like I was holding lightning in my hands. When do we start fighting back? I asked. We already started, Carol replied, her eyes twinkling with a shared sense of purpose. The moment you walked into my office, Derek Sterling became a target instead of a hunter. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about Robert's letter. He'd known this would happen. He'd prepared for it. He'd armed me for a war I didn't even know was coming. But more than that, he'd given me permission to win. That evening, Ryan called. Mom, Derek seems really upset about something. He won't tell me what happened at your meeting. We had a fascinating conversation about his plans for my future. What kind of plans? The kind that assume I'm too stupid to protect myself. Ryan, there are things about your husband you don't know. Things about our family's finances you don't know. Tomorrow, I think it's time you learned the truth. The silence on the other end was deafening. Mom, you're scaring me. Good, I replied, a cold smile forming on my lips. It's about time someone in this family was properly scared. Friday morning arrived with Carol Peterson's call and the sweet promise of professional revenge. I found a lawyer who specializes in prosecuting elder fraud, she said. her voice sharp and eager. "She wants to meet with you today." "How soon?" I asked, a sense of cold purpose filling me. "This afternoon. She's very interested in Derek's case." "Why?" "Because she thinks he's part of a larger operation. If we can prove that, we can bring down the entire network." The idea thrilled me, a perfect echo of Robert's desire to not only protect our family, but to ensure that no one else would suffer what he had worked so hard to prevent. The afternoon meeting took place in the district attorney's office, where I met Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed prosecutor who looked like she ate insurance fraud for breakfast. "Mrs. Miller, tell me about your son-in-law's approach," she said, her eyes never leaving mine. I walked her through every conversation, every manipulation, every carefully crafted lie Derek had fed me and my son. "Classic pattern," she said, making notes. "Family connection, financial pressure, urgency to sign documents. He's done this before." "How can you tell?" I asked. "Because amateurs make mistakes." Derek knew exactly which emotional buttons to push, which legal phrases to use, how to structure the timeline. This is his profession. A cold rage, deeper than before, filled me. This wasn't just about me or my family. It was about a man who had made a career out of destroying lives. "So, what do?" I asked. "We set a trap," Sarah replied, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "Make him think he's won. Then document everything he does next." Carol leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "What kind of trap?" "Mrs. Miller calls him, says she's reconsidered, wants to move forward with signing the papers. We record everything, his response, his instructions, his timeline, and then we arrest him the moment he brings a notary to witness the signing." I smiled, thinking of Derek's desperation, his gambling debts, his absolute certainty that he'd manipulated a helpless widow. "When do we spring this trap?" "Monday," Sarah said. "That gives us the weekend to set up recording equipment and coordinate with the police." Saturday, I spent the day preparing for the performance of my life, practicing my grateful widow voice, rehearsing my lines about feeling safer with Derek's protection. My home, once my sanctuary, was now a stage for the final act of my revenge. The hidden cameras were installed, the audio equipment was tested, and I felt a profound sense of purpose. Sunday brought Ryan, looking worried and confused. "Mom, Derek has been acting strange," he said, his voice laced with concern. "He keeps asking about Dad's finances, about whether you might have hidden accounts or investments." "What did you tell him?" I asked, my heart aching for my son's innocence. "That I don't know anything about your money." "But Mom, why is he so interested?" I looked at my son, beautiful, trusting, completely unaware that his husband was a predator hunting his mother. "Because he needs money more desperately than you realize," I said, the truth a bitter pill on my tongue. "How desperately?" "Desperately enough to steal it from his wife's mother." Ryan stared at me, his face a blank mask of disbelief. "You really think he's trying to steal from you?" "I know he is. The question is whether you're ready to see proof." "What kind of proof?" "The kind that will destroy your marriage but save your mother." Ryan was quiet for a long time, the weight of my words settling over him. Finally, he looked at me, a newfound steel in his eyes. "Show me." Monday morning, I called Derek with the performance of my lifetime. "Derek, it's Eleanor. I've been thinking about our conversation." "Oh." His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the excitement underneath. "I think you're right. I do need protection. I'd like to move forward with those papers." The relief in his voice was audible. "That's wonderful, Eleanor. When would be convenient?" "As soon as possible. This weekend made me realize how vulnerable I really am." "Perfect. I can have everything ready by this afternoon." "This afternoon." I let a note of elderly confusion creep into my voice. "Isn't that rather fast?" "These things work best when handled efficiently," he said, the mask of concern slipping just enough for me to see the impatience and greed beneath it. I'll bring my notary. We'll get everything signed and you'll be completely protected. Protected from him, I thought, a cold smile forming on my lips. Well, if you think it's best, I do. Let's say 3 o'clock at your house. 3 o'clock sounds perfect. After I hung up, Carol nodded approvingly from her position monitoring the recording equipment. He took the bait completely. Now what? I asked, a sense of calm returning. Now we wait for him to hang himself with his own rope. At exactly 3 o'clock, Derek arrived with his briefcase, his notary, and his most trustworthy smile. Hidden cameras captured everything as he spread documents across my coffee table. Eleanor, I can't tell you how relieved I am that you're taking this step. I realized you were right about the dangers. An old woman like me needs guidance. Exactly. Now, these papers will give Ryan and me the authority to protect your interests. All of my interests? All of them, financial decisions, medical choices, living arrangements, everything. Living arrangements. He was already planning to warehouse me somewhere convenient. And this needs to be notarized today because delays create complications. The sooner we get this in place, the sooner you're protected. I picked up the pen, letting my hand shake slightly. This is quite overwhelming. I know it seems complicated. But trust me, this is the best thing for everyone. Trust him. The man who was stealing my life while promising to protect it. I signed the first page, then paused. Derek, can I ask you something? Of course. What happens to my money after I sign this? Your money will be professionally managed. No more worrying about investments or bills or financial decisions. By whom? By people with experience. People who understand these things. People like you? People like Ryan and me. Yes. I signed the second page. And if I change my mind later? Well, that would depend on your mental state at the time. These arrangements are designed to be permanent. Permanent like a life sentence. I see. I signed the third page. Derek, there's something I should mention. What's that? I think there might be more money than you realize. His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. More money? Robert may have had some accounts I didn't know about, hidden investments perhaps. How much more money, Eleanor? And there it was. The greed, the desperation, the absolute confirmation that this was never about protecting me. I'm not sure. Maybe significant amounts. Derek's hands were actually shaking now. Significant how? Well, I said, setting down the pen without signing the final page. That's where things get interesting. What do you mean? I smiled, thinking of $33 million and the trap we had just sprung. I mean, you're under arrest, Derek. You have the right to remain silent. The police emerged from their hiding places as Derek's face went white with shock and terror. You can't. I can. I did. And now you're going to learn what happens to predators who hunt the wrong prey. As they led him away in handcuffs, I heard him screaming about entrapment and legal challenges. But all I heard was the sound of justice being served with a $33 million side of revenge. The news broke that evening. Local businessman arrested in elder fraud sting operation. Derek's perp walk played on every channel, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Ryan called, sobbing, "Mom, what have you done? I've protected myself from your husband's attempt to steal my independence and my assets. But the arrest, the charges, this will destroy him." "Good," I replied, my voice hard as stone. That was the point. The aftermath of Derek's arrest brought an unexpected calm, a profound sense of closure that settled over me and the entire family. Ryan, initially devastated, showed up at my door an hour later, his eyes red and swollen from crying. I sat him down and, with a heavy heart, played the recording of Derek's confession. Every greedy word, every calculated manipulation, every moment he'd revealed his true nature was laid bare for my son to hear. I watched his face cycle through denial, anger, and finally, heartbreaking realization. He was going to put me in a nursing home, sweetheart, I told him gently. The words a final, bitter truth. He was going to steal everything your father left me and convince everyone I was too senile to object. He loved what he thought he could get from you, Ryan. And there is a world of difference between that and real love. I showed him the financial records Carol had uncovered, the gambling debts, the fake business ventures, the systematic targeting of elderly people. This isn't his first time, Ryan. You were married to a professional predator. My son stared at the evidence, the last vestiges of his blissful ignorance crumbling. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and difficult conversations. I met with a victim advocacy group, offering my resources and my story to help others. I found myself becoming a voice for those who couldn't speak, a source of courage for those who had been victimized. Ryan filed for divorce, citing emotional fraud and irreconcilable differences. I can't stay married to someone who tried to rob my mother, he told his lawyer, a newfound strength in his voice. He moved back to town, finding an apartment near mine, and we began the slow, painful process of rebuilding our relationship, this time on a foundation of honesty and trust. Through it all, I never once felt a flicker of regret. I was no longer a timid widow hiding behind flowers. I was a warrior, a protector, and a force to be reckoned with. Derek's trial began in September. His lawyer tried every defense-diminished capacity, entrapment, family misunderstanding, but nothing worked. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings were damning, and the pattern of targeting elderly victims was undeniable. When they played the audio of Derek discussing my mental state and his plans for permanent control of my assets, even his own lawyer looked disgusted. The jury deliberated for a mere 47 minutes. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge looked down at Derek with contempt. Mr. Sterling, you systematically targeted vulnerable people, destroyed their independence, and preyed on their trust. The court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison. As they led him away, he looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, old woman. I smiled sweetly, a profound sense of peace washing over me. Yes, I said, it is. The war was over. Justice had won. And somewhere, in a federal prison, Derek Sterling was learning that some mistakes last forever. Robert's $33 million had bought the most expensive lesson in American criminal history. It had turned a quiet, unassuming widow into a powerful defender of justice, a symbol of hope for thousands of people who had been wronged. I had used his legacy not for luxury or comfort, but for a purpose that mattered. I had honored his memory by becoming the person he knew I could be, a person capable of fighting back and winning. To everyone who has listened to my story, remember this: the greatest revenge isn't about destruction. It's about building something beautiful from the ruins of what was taken. It's about reclaiming your power, your dignity, and your voice. Don't ever let anyone convince you that you are helpless or alone. You are stronger, wiser, and more powerful than you know. Your voice matters. It's a tool for justice, a source of courage for others, and a shield against those who would seek to harm you. So speak up, stand tall, and fight back. You have a story to tell, and the world is ready to listen. If my story has resonated with you, I encourage you to subscribe for more tales of justice and strength. Thank you for listening.